Welcome. I'm Janelle Kolaski, a career mindset coach and actor.
And I'm Amanda Dubois, a self-authenticity and prosperity life coach and actor as well. And we're your co-host of Mindset Artistry YouTube channel,
where we teach you the art of discovering and using your mindset
to build a career and life you desire.
Welcome back to another episode of Mindset Artistry. I am Amanda Dubois, your co-host, and on the other side we have the amazing
Janelle Kolaski, the other co-host, career mindset coach.
You always crack me up when you say you're like, oh, me, yes.
I know.
And today we have an amazing guest, so let's just dive right in. So today we have a Southern California native, George Gomez, a Mexican-American with indigenous roots, writer, filmmaker who has always been passionate about the arts, even as a child. He graduated from California State University, Los Angeles in 2020 with a BA degree in television, film, and media studies. And in the years since then, he has been involved in filmmaking process in numerous departments and has worked on projects for companies such as NBC Universal, Hulu, Netflix, and Amazon Prime Video. He's honed his skills in departments such as casting, talent, post-production, production management, camera, and so much more. And not to mention, he works with New Filmmakers LA. And I'm so excited to have you here. So yes, a round of applause. Thank you for coming on. This is a long-awaited interview, as I met you back in, I believe, October of last year at the American Film Convention.
Yes, that's so long ago. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're already in 2025, and that was 2024. The year has been flown by, but thank you for having me, Amanda. Thank you for having me, Janelle. I really appreciate it. Like Amanda was saying, good to be here. Finally, get to be on the podcast. My first time being on an official podcast, to be quite honest.
We feel honored.
Yes.
We'll ease this journey because this is going to be a full, good conversation, and you get to share your stories. Let's get into it. So obviously we are actors and creatives, and you understand this journey. So tell me a little bit about how this journey has gone for you since you've graduated. I know graduating in 2020 must have been quite an insane experience. And what did you learn from that as you progressed throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, I always add that in the bio just so people can know right off the bat, like you said, the predicament we were all in during that time, being like not only obviously being a film student, everyone knows like, okay, how am I supposed to break in? What are the things to do? What are the pathways to get into? But being that it was 2020, like so many things were just completely different. Everything was online. No one was working, not even just like in terms of people who graduated film school, but like once I got into the industry, how many people were telling me like, hey, during 2020, I was like doing like Uber, I was doing DoorDash, I was doing, not working at all. So I guess it's, just to kind of start off on my journey, it started a little bit, on the cliche saying of like, it is who based off who you know. It was such a weird thing. It was a friend of a friend's cousin's friend. So like it was this weird connection where they just kind of, a show was specifically The Voice had an opening for a position, specifically in the post department. And, they offered it to me. And ever since then, it was kind of like feet on the ground, sprinting, going to the next job, one after the other. So it's an interesting journey. It is. I don't think, like many people say, everyone has something a little bit different. I should say that we always start off maybe not in the department we want to complete. And so I was telling this with Janelle. We had a little short conversation a couple weeks ago where, just being patient and, don't kind of get into the idea that you have to do everything right away or you have to jump into what you want to do right away. Being patient with yourself and being patient with the industry, just in general, it changes so much. You can find so many different people saying that, their journeys have changed. They start off doing one thing, but they ended up doing this, or just like the trends of the industry as well, just kind of change all the time and they fluctuate. So, I think in terms of like career, it's just very interesting. I think that's just like quickly like my journey and of how I got started. It was a little tangent on the side.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. specifically you starting in a place where things were so unpredictable. I mean, this career already, just being in this industry, is very unpredictable. We don't know when the next job's going to come. Things change overnight. We had so many things happen between 2020 and 2025. So, what what have you held on to, or a mindset, or even a thought that has kept you grounded throughout this industry and navigating, I guess, Hollywood and filmmaking and going from gig to gig and job to job until you've landed, with New Filmmaking LA?
Yeah. I think the idea that, sometimes sacrifice is necessary, at the end of the day, that it's similar in the similar vein of being patient. Just, you have an ultimate end goal and you maybe obviously have a plan to do that end goal. Let's say, for example, I want to create a feature. That's my ultimate end goal. I have this story that I really want it, I have written down and want to get it out there. Just being patient in the sense of, and sacrificing where that it might not happen right away. It might not happen immediately. You might not have the tools, maybe in terms of the skill set. It might be the funding. And it might be where things are going on in your personal life where you can't, dedicate that time to create that project. Just being patient with yourself and really just, like I said, understanding that sacrifice sometimes is necessary to do what you want to do. And this can be applied kind of like not only obviously in the creative entertainment space, but just in general, like life schools and I should say life goals. Whether it's like I want to become a lawyer or I'm trying to get that medical degree, understanding that maybe sacrifice in the sense of may not be able to see friends as much, might not be have time for my personal hobbies. So many different things kind of require sacrifice. And I think, especially in the creative space, people tend to forget that. Like I mentioned earlier, people kind of have this idea where things are supposed to happen immediately, and there's plenty of stories where that's true. Like there is that story about, what is it, Steven Spielberg? He made Jaws when he was 26, and I can't imagine creating a feature, like an impactful project like that lasts through generations at 26. But then there are other, not necessarily stories, but other and anecdotes of other people in the industry where they get to start at 56 or, in their 70s or their late 40s or 30s or whatever the case may be. So everyone's journey is a little bit different. And so, and like I said, understanding that patience is key, understanding that sacrifice may be asked of you. I think that's important to take into consideration. Not only have I seen that directly in my journey, as like a freelancer, before I became at New Filmmakers Los Angeles, but even we hear that story now in our organization. We deal with so many independent, creators in the space, writers, directors, even on the below the line positions, and they say the same thing. Like, hey, I'm working on this short film, but I'm also working full time at this other place, or like, hey, I'm working on 3 different projects. Like, I'm producing for this one, but I'm also DPing for this other project, or same thing. We hear so many stories such as that, and I know so many people who are like that now, and I'm sure you and Janelle and Amanda as well know so many people who are juggling 6 different things at once.
We are both are.
See,
We
right?
both are juggling
And,
all types of
and
businesses.
we are, and I think it's definitely the multi-hyphenate creative is what it used to be the triple quadruple threat, but now not everybody is signed to a contract with one Hollywood studio, and I think there was a little bit of a stigma around that. So you can't be serious about acting and also be creative in other ways. No way. So, George, I love advice you have for our listeners about how to find that balance. And I love you brought up you could get it at 26 or 56, this success, and kind of encouraging yourself in that way. But how should these filmmakers take care of themselves and find that balance for their life?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I struggle with this. So I'm speaking to the choir. I'm also speaking to myself in this sense as well. Is just, finding what you love at the end of the day and finding something that relaxes you. Definitely, hobbies are a great thing. I mean, personally, as a creative in the space, I love kind of all forms of media entertainment. So of course, when I need to get away from everything and like when I'm like focusing on a project and I can't, like, whatever, I'm writing at something and I'm stuck on a line or a page, I just let me go do something else. Let me just watch a great film, or let me just let me read a book, or, it's always great to see what other people and how they got their ideas out. I think that's a great way to kind of deal with your own kind of necessarily writer's block, because obviously, not everyone's a writer, but this block that you might have of like creative energy that you're having trouble to get out. Definitely looking at other people, looking at other people's works. Definitely just hobbies in general. I love just, going for a walk. To be quite honest, it's cliche as it sounds. People underrate walking, or maybe it might be overrated at this point, but walking is such a good way just to clear your mind, just to really see what's going on out there in general. Obviously, not everyone has like a walkable neighborhood, as they say, but just being out there, even just like, going to a high school track and going a couple laps on the track and field walk could really do help. And, there's so many science like articles about, oh, walking is so beneficial. So also to keep in mind, but definitely just keeping hobbies and like, like I said, just enjoying the other parts of the entertainment space that you want to do. I'm sure yourselves, love going to see a movie or love seeing a play or, like I said, reading a book. Personally, I like I said, myself, I love playing video games. So that's another way for me myself to de-stress and like get my mind off of like what is going on in the industry, in the world, or whatever the case may be. I think it's a great way. I think it's the most like basic advice you could give someone. And of course, there are other like, you know, really kind of mantras you should give yourself, and just also to remember to kind of give yourself grace. And um, in the sense of I like to do is I like to write down stuff. Journaling is also a great way to just get your mind off things, and it doesn't have to be super formal. It doesn't have to be dear diary, this happened on this date on on this section. I've met so many people, they journal through other means. Like I remember a conversation I had with someone, and they write down poems as like a way to like journal, to get some things out for that day. And it was very interesting to think about, in the sense of like, oh, like it's so, like I said, unrestricted in terms of that, to get your ideas out, versus like, it has to be like, this is what I did today. This is how I feel. And that in itself could feel restrictive. So I completely understand that. I think that's what would be my advice to people. Just, exercise, writing is always great. And just, finding something that you love or love to do. You mentioned, Janelle, something about the multi-hyphenate, being like a creative in so many different places, so many different spaces. I think people, especially in this LA culture or like the New York culture of like, everyone has to have the side hustle. And as much as true as that is, it's also a great thing just to take a step back and just relax, enjoy something. Sometimes you don't have to look at things so critically. Like I said, whether it's like a movie, whether it's a book, whether it's just like running or walking, we're so quick to, I would say, like put ourselves in competition of everything, make everything a competition. Whether it's like I want to get to that body, or I want to make that project, or I want to like get this idea across. We have to like just like calm down and be like, like it's okay to enjoy things. It's okay to just like I love like this. I'm just doing that. It doesn't have to be so deep and like like I said, critical.
Yeah, well, it feels and sounds like basic, but it's not. We do need a basic foundation from which to build from. And the only way to understand ourselves as creatives and give ourselves the freedom of expression and storytelling is we got to ground with ourselves. We have got to connect with our inner truth. And like you said, gaming is great as an outlet as well, as an outlet of expression, as an outlet of just release and exciting. And like, what story could I tell? You talked about basic like walking. That is our bodies moving. That is our bodies releasing. That is our bodies allowing itself to connect. And it may seem like we're moving, but our mind is still, it allows us to be present. So I appreciate you sharing that. And you said it seems basic, but it's not. It's one of the most impactful, powerful things that we can do as creatives is tap into our inner selves, tap into what we need, tap into what we want for ourselves, because this career is ever changing, its career is ever going, as you know. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I do want to go a bit, take a step back, you being a Mexican American and having indigenous roots. What has that taught you about storytelling, and how important is that to your work and sharing that with the new Filmmakers LA, because they're so with the monthly projects that they have going on and the showings and the interviews. Like, tell me a bit more about that impact and how that has transitioned into all the other work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, just like I give a little bit of like context and background is just so, from my mother's side, my maternal side, they were full-blooded, from the peninsula of Yucatan. So in Mexico, the peninsula, where so a lot of them from that mother's side, they spoke a lot of Mayan. You know, that was like the indigenous language, and so they're indigenous roots, and so that's where my roots come from, and that's why I kind of always acknowledge that, even though maybe phonetically, I should say, my phenotypes don't, come out that way. It's something that I always keep in the back of my mind because I have pictures of my grandparents and they look, completely indigenous compared to, some of my siblings were a little bit more taller, a little bit more fair skinned. Um, but it's important because I think there are so many layers, and you can look at it ethnically in terms of like being Latin and Hispanic, but you can think of it in any other ethnicity where there are so many intrinsic layers even within those ethnicities. There are, to quote Shrek, there are layers. There are more layers within those layers. Um, for example, I remember growing up being in Southern California. I grew up a lot of Hispanics, a lot of Latin people, but also around a lot of Asian American people. So, like I said, identifying the differences between those two. I remember, talking to someone who's from Laos, and I've never heard of Laos when I was like, growing up until like I got into high school. Like, oh, you're from Laos? Like I've never heard of Laos. I've never heard of the culture. Never heard of what language do they speak there. I know people who are like have Indonesian roots, and it's like people always kind of forget that even within those subcultures there are like layers, like I mentioned. So in terms of like the work, I just want to kind of, in terms of my writing, in terms of the projects that I love to create, is just showing that, like I said, showing those layers within the Mexican American side. So like, and it's nothing, this is not a dig at anyone, but in terms of the projects that come out, they're very much centered in Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles. And that is, a great epicenter of a Mexican American culture, of the what comes out of that space. But there are so many different areas that I guess people fail to recognize, in terms of that. I come from, just so for the viewers, maybe they might know, but there's a San Gabriel Valley. So, in LA, there's a San Fernando Valley, and then there's a San Gabriel Valley. And I think people forget to think about the San Gabriel Valley, which is totally fine because it's not, I don't meet, at least since I've been in this industry for the last 5 years, I hardly ever meet people who are like, know that area, especially if you're like, transplant, been in LA for like 10 years or so, maybe didn't grow up here. So it's like, I don't really venture off East Side, in terms of like, there's LA and then there's the Inland Empire. That's pretty much it. But understanding that even those, like I said, there's a different culture out there. There's a different, like, set of rules. Not, I want to say, maybe not set of rules. Maybe that's the right, wrong terminology, but there's a different, different way of living. And that's it. And I think people, like I said, it's great to show that there are people might not come from the same place, but they might have grown up differently. So their culture is a little different. And I think showing that in your work is very important. And that's very important to me because I think individuality is something that I think we should all hold on to. And I think we should all define and kind of keep that. And I think just knowing like I said, who yourself is, that's really the important thing. And in terms of like the work that we do at New Filmmakers LA, that's why I enjoy the work, because we celebrate those different subsets and recognize that even within those subsets, there are different stories to be heard. For example, we just had our April Film Festival, and that was, we had this thing called In Focus theme. And so all that means really is that we're dedicating at least one block of programming to that quote unquote theme. And our themes usually focus on underrepresented or marginalized groups of people. And so for this April one was Asian cinema and immigration. So all the films were played either by, people who identify as immigrants, people who identify as Asian, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera, just telling their stories. And there were so many different, like I said, so many different stories within it. There was a film about a Japanese immigrant coming in the 1970s and how she was dealing with that, kind of being an elementary school student and dealing with that culture. People were like, oh, people were, like in the film, people were calling her Chinese, even though she was Japanese, There was another film about how a half Japanese woman, or I think it was, half Japanese woman, and half, Caucasian woman, how she got a date. She got asked on a date by a white passing out on this Japanese like culture tea tasting date. And so, it was a story about that. And like I said, recognizing that there's so many different, stories to be told. There was another film about a Taiwanese American and how their interactions with like a super religious, uber religious neighbors, and like how their dynamic was when he like lived in LA in like the 1990s. And like I said, so many different stories need to be told, and people have so many different perspectives. And I think people forget, and it's okay to forget. It's okay to not know, but it's one thing to it's one thing to not know. It's one thing to blatantly ignore, what's in front of you if these stories are being told. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, if the stories are being told, if there's an opportunity to hear them, why not?
I love all of that. I've always been curious about other cultures. I don't know if it's my father's a journalist, and I just think it's exciting to learn about anything other than me. I'm like, oh, boring old Janelle. But what advice would you have for people that are kind of like, I don't know how to embrace other cultures, or maybe they have a little trepidation? Because here on the Mindset Artistry podcast, we talk about, leaning into what's uncomfortable or new. And sometimes there's like, people are afraid to try new things even for their career because something about fear of like what's going to happen. So the power of the storytelling in these films that you're making, it's like a non-invasive way, non-confrontational way of being like, look at this beautiful, gorgeous world out here and all these people that make it wonderful. But how would you encourage people to embrace other cultures more if maybe they're afraid to admit that they're just like, I'm a little afraid, I don't know, it's new?
I think the first thing is with anything, just taking baby steps, being, just knowing that, like you said, maybe you don't know, and admitting is the first step in anything really. Like, hey, I don't know this culture and I would like to know more. And just like I said, starting with baby steps, whether it's, finding a field and maybe in that culture that you might be, interested in. I can speak from personal experience in the sense of, being though I am Mexican American with indigenous roots, Spanish is a very interesting conversation to have, knowing Spanish, because my parents were, even though they came, immigrants from here, they never really encouraged me to speak it. They were very much like English speaking, try their best to, learn the language. And so it was very interesting. And you can hear stories from other, people who are immigrants from families or from Latin American countries where, Spanish is like the main language they speak. They're like essentially translating for their parents when they go to the doctors or to like different government offices. And that's like it kind of goes back to about, how everyone goes up a little differently, where my parents were very much like, okay, we need to learn the language. And so almost all my life they spoke, both English and Spanish, but like trying their best to give that across to us as well, as like, English is more important than Spanish in a sense, even if they didn't say it, verbally, they definitely did it by not enforcing that on us, and because of that, I kind of like, I feel a little bit, especially when I talk to other people who speak fluent, and I'm like, I feel a little bit self-conscious about that. But, in a way that helps me identify with it, helps me like, get to know that culture is like through music. Finding that the music, and it doesn't have to be like traditional, like in terms of my, like I said, my side is, traditional regional Mexican music. I listen to different like, independent rock Mexican bands, and that helps me like, identify with my culture, even though it's not maybe like, let's just say the typical quote unquote type of music, if that makes sense, I guess. But just like identifying with different fields, might be like I said, maybe if it wasn't music, I would be listening, watching Mexican films, or like Latin American films. That might be a little bit different. Or like, for, let's say, for example, of someone who wants to switch careers. So like if, someone is in the like banking, let's say they're in the financial field, but they want to make films, they want to make projects. It's just, going to the first step is maybe going to a festival, going to a networking event, meeting people like, hey, I would like to get into this, taking those first steps and just talking to people is a great way to hear other people's journeys, to hear other people's stories. I mean, this is what this podcast is, right? For someone who might be interested in like getting into the field and knowing different experiences, is just hearing other people talk. Taking that baby steps, like I said, is just, it could be something as simple as having a conversation with someone. It could be as a grand a step as like, hey, I'm just going to grab my phone, I'm going to film something, doing it yourself. So I think it's just remembering that whatever you're comfortable with, as much as you can hear from other people or do it things yourself. I think is finding something that you're comfortable doing, whether it's like I said, hearing the story, doing it yourself, and just trying it for yourself. So I think taking that into account when trying to transition from careers, whether it's like even from entertainment to business or business entertainment or mixing the two, finding a comfortable space for yourself and taking those first steps, and whatever that looks like is whatever that looks like.
Yeah, that's so powerful and impactful. And it sounds like you're aware of the impact of culture and you want to share that and have encourage other people to really nurture their backgrounds. I think, like you said, I grew up in I can relate to, I am half Puerto Rican, half Black, but I don't speak fluent Spanish. I can understand it, but there was always growing up, there's some sense of insecurity there, like, oh yeah, I am Puerto Rican, but I don't quite speak it. And so that's such a relatable storyline for all of us who have immigrant parents or parents who just like, no, we got to integrate into America because we want you to belong, we want you to like fit in. And it's like, no, we're not meant to fit in, we're not meant to be a mold, we're meant to break it. We're meant to explore and share our story. And that's the important part of why you came here, why we exist. It's so impactful. And I appreciate that because, again, I relate to it. I'm like, ooh, and I'm like, but I'm proud to say that I am Puerto Rican and I am Black. And music is so impactful. And speaking of music, there's this ruminating experience that I had because I watched Sinners recently and music was did you get to see it yet?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good. All right. Well, for me, it was beyond the vampires. It was how important music is. That specific scene, which I don't want to kind of give that spoiler for everyone, but in their place and all the different characters that came up as he was singing and how impactful and important it is for music. Music is something that we can connect from the past, present, and future, and that's what we have, and that's storytelling. That's the reason why all three of us are here today, is because we have this innate need to storytell, and it matters. It matters. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go
Sorry.
ahead, go for it. Yeah.
No, but that's, I mean, I think that's like you said, the real point of it is that music obviously is one of them, but just art in general, really, that's like the connecting factor. Like you mentioned, like storytellers, like we all three of us want to be stories, want to tell stories through whatever art form that we, choose. And I think, like you mentioned, it's the innate thing. As we can go into the political stuff, but like, all the decut funding of the arts, people always forget that the arts is what we go back to at the end of the day. It's like, if we didn't have anything, what would we be doing? Like, money wasn't an issue, if like we didn't have these societal standards of each other, of like that placed upon us, what would we be doing? And half of us are like, oh, I would just paint, or like I would just make, this, or I would just, act. And it's like, why are we doing these things? Why are we defunding these programs, these organizations? Why are we not giving, more money to filmmakers to make stuff? It just doesn't make sense. And like I said, that's like a whole beast of a conversation that we can have. But that is like, the eccentrics, and that's what kind of, like you said, stood out to me. And during that scene in the Centers, I'm like, oh, everyone can connect through this art form of music. And it's like, it's just, it's great to see. I should say, it's so interesting to see from someone's like, okay, music is the connecting form, but how do I show that through film? How do I show that through a scene? And then the scene that they came up with, I'm like, it's genius in itself.
Yes, I was like, everyone watch it because I don't want to spoil it. And if you haven't, watch it with a friend, and then let's jump into the conversation. And yeah, what they did was they said it without saying it, and it was beautifully done, and it was magical, and it was artistic, and it was inclusive. That was the best part about it, that it was, you're talking about the Asian Americans that you just recently in April, like they had that there's a lot of history and culture that got erased or misconceptions that we have. And so it was beautiful to see that they were inclusive, with the Asian Americans, indigenous, and just like African culture. There were so many beautiful pieces within that I was so grateful to have seen that and witnessed that in the theater, which it brought me back to why you, me, and Janelle are here. because storytelling, we have to tell our stories. Our voices matter. Otherwise, what are we doing it for? Like, really, truly, what are we doing it for? Like you said, that there is the through line between human and humanity is our culture and experience and storytelling. The beauty about also storytelling is that it will live on beyond us. It will live on beyond us. And I want to ask you this, like, and speaking of like stories, like what was a moment where you saw like representation truly shift in the rooms and maybe a film or something that you felt like finally, yes, that's what I've been wanting to share, and like now encourage that for the audience and creatives to do moving forward.
That's a really good question. I haven't really thought about that, but it probably has to be, definitely my time during like a film school in 20 like 18 and 19, that cusp of years before the pandemic. It's such a crazy thing, just on the side tangent, to be like, yeah, like, where we can identify like so many much of our life is like before the pandemic, after the pandemic. So it's so crazy to think about every now and then. But just seeing that, being a lot of my peers during that time were of different, backgrounds, not just, ethnically, but like, socioeconomically. And then even within itself, it's like, okay, were there, a lot of them were immigrants, a lot of them, maybe half of them were not. And it's just to see, I think that was kind of the shift in terms of like seeing it before my eyes, not to say that it wasn't like that before, but I just, it being from I guess I should say from a town of like, a couple 100,000 people to like, a city, to be entrenched in a city where you see millions a day. I think that's the crazy kind of eye opener. But in terms of like the projects that were put out, I think, I'm trying to think of like maybe one that really, that influenced me. It's maybe not something that came out recently. But like I remember seeing a film, by Wong Kar-wai, Happy Together, and that kind of like opened my eyes in terms of like people have been doing this for years in terms of like representing or like telling stories that are so human that it can be relatable regardless of background. So like just to give context of Happy Together, if you haven't watched the film, I think you probably should. I think it's like, yeah, just to give like the most basic like log line, it's just about a deteriorating relationship about gay men, two gay Chinese men, and they live in Argentina, and so that's like the background of it. But like to show, like it's one of my favorite films, and if you're on Letterboxd, it's my top four. It's on my top four. It's just to show the deteriorating relationship, just like a universal experience that anyone can see and like and can relate to. Like I said, just seeing like the breakdown of a relationship with someone you really loved, of seeing how like that it can go from like sweet to sour in like just a matter of days. And being that this movie was filmed and released in 1997, it's like these stories have been being told everywhere, but it's like we're in this digital age where things can be accessed so easily. It's like, oh, now I can see it at any point, any time. But I remember seeing that during that time period of like 2018 and 2019, of just seeing these types of films that I had not heard of before, of being around people who are of different backgrounds, like I said, not just culturally and ethically, but just about about everything about them was different. It's just, it kind of, like I said, opened my eyes in that sense.
Wow, I appreciate that. Well, I'm gonna have to put that on my long list of things to watch because there's just so much that we have to like catch up on when it comes to like there's just so many beautiful things to watch now, and the platforms are expanding. Like the platforms are insane now. And speaking of platforms, I know new Filmmakers LA works with stars, and so tell me a bit about that program and how you saw that impact for those that were participating in that program.
Yeah, definitely. And I probably should have saw that. You mentioned it in one of the questions earlier. I probably should just give like context to our viewers about what New Filmmakers LA is. So New Filmmakers LA, just like for those who don't know, it's a nonprofit organization based out here in Los Angeles, as it says. Really, our mission is to bridge that gap between independent filmmakers to the film industry at large. So we do that through a number of different ways. One of the programs that we do it through, like you mentioned, is a STARS program. But it's also through our monthly film festivals. We have a grant program for filmmakers. We also have other career workforce development programs throughout the year. We have a high school mentorship program to educate, high school students interested in the entertainment field. And we give out college internships. We have college internships for people who want to know just organization or get to know the space. So that's like really like the basic guideline. But the STARS program, the STARS program, it's an amazing program. It's partnered up with an elite. It's called, the official title is STARS # Take the Lead Writers Intensive, and it's amazing because we mentor essentially, and it's going on. I think we're gonna start up again this year, and I want to say it'll be its 5th year. Don't quote me on that. Might be it's like 6th or 7th. But we mentor, depending on the season, anywhere from 4 to 10 screenwriters. Mentor them, help them develop a spec script of a current, star show. And, once they develop that spec, they get in front of Stars executives and pitch that. And, the ultimate long run is to eventually staff them on a Stars show, So it's amazing. Like I said, it's something we've been doing the last 5 to 10 years. And we look for people, just who not obviously have a little bit of experience in the space, since it is a little bit more for like, not necessarily early career screenwriters, but maybe like have a couple of things under their belt, whether it's like a screenwriting contest or like a festival that their project has played at. But it's like at the end of the day, as like I mentioned, our mission is to really like foster that next, I don't want to say generation, because even though it's in our title, like new filmmakers, it really is just for independent filmmakers, really independent creators, and really just trying to push them to the forefront and get them that, get those stories told, because we don't have like it's very broad in terms of like the categories and who can apply. So it doesn't really matter where you're from, what you do. You could be a 50-year-old writer from Michigan that wants to do the program. As long as you meet the requirements, we'll take your application seriously.
Wow, what a great opportunity. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
And what advice do you have, because you've helped so many people through this program that are overwhelmed by the process? It is a process. Like, well, where do I start? Or am I really good enough to make a film? Or, and you hear of people taking years, and other people can make something in a couple days or a weekend. And I'd love to hear the advice you have for our listeners about all of that.
Definitely. As I mentioned earlier too, it's like I'm telling myself this as well. So I think remembering that even though people who maybe their position seems unattainable, or like you're like, oh wow, they're doing so many different things. Know that half the time, like, no, we're right there with you in terms of like our mindset, or like finances, or whatever the case may be. But the thing is the other thing that I tell myself every day is like, comparison is the thief of joy. And it truly is. It really is. It's like, I remember, especially when I was younger, coming out of, doing film school, like I said, just on a personal side note, it was like so many of the students were able to create their projects and create their thesis films or create side projects outside of class. And for myself, I was working full time and going to school full time. So it was like very hard for me to do that. And I remember going through my journey, and I was like, oh, like I wish I could have I wish I could be doing that with them, or like, no, but I have to work like a whole 8-hour shift, 9-hour shift. So comparison really is the thief of joy. It's just knowing that regardless of that person that is doing it in 4 days, however long you need to take to do it is however long you need to take to do it. Like, there's no shame in that, recognizing that every journey is different. Recognizing your own journey is not going to be like anyone else's. It doesn't matter if you are growing up, you could be your twin, doing the same thing with you. If they're doing it completely, their journey could be completely different from yours. First off, I think recognizing that. And then second is, if you have a friend or two that want to take this journey with you, or take those steps with you, don't be afraid to rely on them, or don't be afraid to call up that other friend that, maybe wanted to do, something like, there's so many, examples, and you can come up with stories, and you can hear other people where, they called up a friend like, hey, I needed an editor for this. Can you do it? And maybe that was that one friend that was looking for an excuse to like, really, okay, I really wanted to do like an editing project. I really want to hone my skills. Or like, hey, I really wanted to DP, even though I am a producer, or vice versa. You're like, someone who might be a writer is like looking to jump into the producing space. So, just recognizing that there are people to help you, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's another thing as well, is recognizing, comparison is a thief of joy, recognizing that, everyone's journey is a little bit different, and recognizing that it doesn't hurt to help. There's nothing bad that could happen from you from asking for help. The worst thing that someone's going to say is no. They might throw an insult in there, but that's it. It's just words at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, well, insults and the no. I mean, as creatives, we constantly are addressing that rejection or that no, or someone not seeing our vision, not recognizing, like, we as creatives know what it could look like and what it could feel like and the impact, and we have a deep connection to it. And then we share it with the world or share it with someone. They're like, well, that don't make no sense. We don't know. Never mind. Pass, move on. So with that, right, I know, like, even like, oh gosh, that cringe feeling. What is your advice to creatives out there who are excited to share their story, or whatever art form that they want to share? How do they protect their creativity while trying to juggle all of these things where it's, someone's perception of them, validation maybe, or maybe that imposter syndrome that comes up and is like, I don't know if I belong here. Like, how do we protect our creativity and also ourselves? Like, what advice do you have for that?
Yeah, I think recognizing that, you're not for everyone, as like, as cliche as it sounds, and as like, maybe, I don't want to say rude, but like, as blunt as it can sound, is recognizing that, you're not for everyone. And that's not a dig on yourself. That's not a dig on the other person. It's just some things might not mesh well. You mentioned it earlier. Maybe you have this project, you release it, or like you have this like rough cut and you share your idea with someone. They're like, oh no, I don't think that makes sense. And that's totally fine. People, I think recognizing that, everything has its audience. You're not gonna, as someone who's like a very medical show, person, you're not gonna recommend them, some sci-fi, drama series. If they're like, I love Grey's Anatomy, you're not gonna recommend, you might not, recommend them Black Mirror if it's not like their thing. And it's okay to have different audiences. It's okay to like know that your project might not connect with some people, and that's okay. It will find its audience if your vision is strong enough. If you have a clear enough idea of what you want to get across, it will find its audience. It might not be the people you hold dearest, or might not be the people you expect, but it could. People recognize originality, and people recognize authenticity. And as long as your project, and as long as yourself, and this can be applied not to only just your project, but just to your person, just as a person, as long as you're authentic, as long as you just, yourself, that's it. You'll be good. You'll be set. And like I said, sometimes certain circumstances might suck. It might hurt to say that no. It might be like a little bit debilitating. But just recognizing that, you are you. And like I said, give yourself some grace. The fact that you're doing it is an achievement of itself. Everyone's idea of success can be a little different, and don't let other people define that. And that's hard. It's so hard. Don't trust me. I as to all the viewers out there, I take that to myself as well. I'm like, I wish I could be doing a little bit more. I have so many things that, they're on the books that just haven't gotten made yet. That doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's just, you gotta do it one step at a time.
Yes, yes. We have this artistic voice, like you're saying. It feels we have artistic voice and the needs, but unfortunately, not everyone's going to see it, and that's okay. Like, you're not. Listen, I might be whiskey for someone that likes tea, and that's okay. That is
Exactly.
absolutely okay. And I'm like, you know what? That's fine. So it's that acceptance, it's that self-acceptance is what it feels like. It's like, accept your story, accept your version of it. Because like Jaws wasn't for everybody. Like you mentioned Jaws earlier. People were like crapping on the early cuts of it. And they were like, this is gonna be crap. The amount of struggle he came up with, the mechanics of the shark, and it just, no one was like, this is not going to be anything. And now it's one of the cult favorites today, years and decades later. It's like, yeah, so believe in your story, believe in your voice, and set aside the naysayers, because they don't have what you have. That's the whole purpose. And with the new Filmmakers LA, and I love that it's inclusive. It's not just about those that are coming out of college or fresh out of college. You're talking about people of all ages that they've retired from their day job, but now they're like, I'm free. I want to write. I've been wanting to write for my whole life, but I never had the opportunity to. Great, you're offering that. And I know there's a lot of programs involved with NFMLA, but it's never really talked about enough. But docuseries, documentaries. I love that that's being incorporated with them. So can you tell me a little bit about like that journey of encouraging docuseries in that indie world, because that is such an important path for storytellers. We get to interview, grandparents and tell their stories. And it's like, it's so cool. And especially now with all these podcasts and crime podcasts, like those are docuseries as well. So tell me a bit about that. And with that, and then we'll kind of close this out, is how can people and creatives get in contact with new filmmakers LA? What should they look for depending on what they're interested in? And if you're willing, how could they reach out to you?
Yeah, of course. It's a great point because I think documentaries are an underrated thing. There was a documentary I heard from one of my colleagues. There's a documentary produced by YouTube. I forget it's something. It just came out not too long ago. I don't quote me on the title, so I do apologize not giving the title. But it was opening day production produced by YouTube, which is everyone knows YouTube. And I think he said that there was only like 5 people, including him and his partner, at the movie premiere at like the Friday night. And so it's like, you know, it sucks. And don't get me wrong, I'm the same way too. There are so many documentaries that I wish I could go see, but I love fiction. So I'm speaking this from like a person who loves fiction, but you know, we recognize that within the organization, so many of our film submissions that want to showcase our festivals were documentaries. We recognize that, and so we were like, what can we do? And so we dedicated essentially a whole festival to showcase documentaries. So that's our docu-series, our docu-slate series was what we call it. It happens in conjunction with our Indigenous Cinema Film Festival as well. Usually happens the same weekend, but I think in the past we've done it like within two separate weekends. But like I said, just dedicated kind of to the story of documentaries. And so documentaries are so powerful. They can really influence, so many different ideas and so many different stories that you might not have, thought about. And it's such a great way to just, like I said, showcase the humanity of it really, and the reality of some people's, stories and some people's circumstances. And like I said, it's something we recognize, and so we do our best to like I said, dedicate a whole block to it. But we showcase, documentaries throughout the whole year in terms of our programming. We actually, I remember I saw one we showcased back in January. It was about a 98-old Korean man and about his journey of, like the last 10 years of his life, I should say, last 10 years of his life in the sense of how he lost his wife of 50 plus years, and essentially from 88 to 98, and how his journey of how he was dealing with that grief. And it honestly made me cry. I was bawling in tears by the time I finished the 15 short minute film. And it was amazing because not only was it about like I said, a 98 Korean man who I've never met in my life, but it was directed by a film student in the Cal State University system. So I was even more blown away. And I was this was made by someone who was 5 years younger than me. I'm and it's making me cry. 10 years younger than me, and I'm bawling my eyes out. And it's those stories that are so impactful that maybe it makes me look at not just the elderly, but just in people in general, and recognize that they have their own stories, and have everyone has a a past to them, or is dealing with some kind of grief, and it makes me kind of hold space in my heart, and that's how powerful documentaries are. That's the insane part. It's just a 15-minute short film made me rethink of how I interact with everyday people, and that's the beauty of, like I said, not only film but just arts in general, because that could be the same thing. That could be applied to a 15-minute book, that I read, a 15-minute, podcast that I heard, or a painting that I saw that can get those emotions across, which is really, like I said, really powerful in that sense. And I think that was the first part of your question. But and the second part, I guess where to reach me, right? How to get involved in New Filmmakers LA. I mean, you can follow us on social media, of course, as with anything organization. It's just our acronym all across social media. NFMLA. You can follow us on I think it's X, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, if you use those platforms. But if you ever want to attend our festivals are monthly, and they take place in downtown LA. It's a short minute drive from wherever you are. I'm sure 30-minute to 20-minute drive, and from anywhere in LA. Tickets are on sale if you just go to our website, newfilmmakersla.com. /events. You can see all the events for the rest of the year. So if you can't make it to the May festival, you can always make it to plan out a day for like the June, July, or whatever month you would like to attend. And you can get involved. And that's essentially, if you follow all our stuff, you can see all the programs that we do, all the virtual conversations and panels that we host as well. If you want to get involved, that's a great place to say it, to see it in social media. And then myself, I'm on Instagram, I'm on X or Twitter, I'm on Letterboxd and LinkedIn as well, George Gomez. I think my social handle is like George, so Gorge. Either it's underscore or a period, depending on the platform. Gomez, GMZZ, because Gomez is such a common last name. Couldn't find my actual, name.
Amazing. And before we close, I know I heard from a little birdie that you're a writer, but you don't write enough.
Yes, that's the last piece of advice I'll give to any writers. It's okay, you take your time. Everyone has a process. I don't write enough, and I want to write more. It's something I keep telling myself, and no matter how many conversations I have with people, it's something that I do want to do more. But it goes back to what we've been talking about this whole past 50 minutes. Being patient and understanding that my journey is completely different from everyone else's. So I know that as long as my heart is in it, and as long as I dedicate at least a little bit of time, whatever I want to get written will be written.
Yeah,
Love
we'll be
that.
checking
That's
up
great.
on you for sure.
Yeah,
We can be
that's great
accountability
advice.
buddies. Well, before we say goodbye, I just want to say thank you, George, so much. And you've inspired me with what you've shared today. And I'm sure our listeners will love it. And I love documentaries too. I was like, oh my gosh, I had a Sundoc subscription for a while, and I watch PBS documentaries all the time. So I can't wait to come out west so I can come to an event.
Yes, please do so. Thank you for Amanda. You too as well. If you want to come to an event, just let me know. Thank you
Yes,
so
of
much
course.
for having me. Really appreciate it. This is a great first podcast experience, so I'm
We
happy.
eased you in. It wasn't so like, all right, good. So good. Now, many, many more after that. And it's such a prosperous, and I appreciate what you're doing, and keep it up, because your voice matters. And we always tell that. And like, now you're a part of the Mindset Artistry community, and we're so grateful to have you. And you're always welcome to come back and share what's going on, because just like NFMLA is, we want to keep the stories going. We want to make it inclusive. We want you to share your story. We want you to recognize that your voice matters, you matter, your story matters. And that's where you're doing it. And George, I really appreciate you, emphasizing that throughout this whole podcast episode. And, in culture should never be dismissed. We should never dismiss it. And we should recognize the humanity through line that we all have and all share. And that's the beauty and the gift that we get to do. So thank you so much for encouraging that. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
What are your thoughts about this episode?
Drop it in the comments and let us know what you want to dive into next.
Subscribe, like, share, and click the link below to book a free consultation. And
We'll see you next time.